Okay, good morning, everyone. Hopefully you can see my webcam today. I guess yesterday it wasn't working, but just wanted to pop on and say thanks for joining. This is AAC Ready, Set, Goal Part 2. So hopefully you were able to join yesterday for Part 1. If not, the recording for that will be posted in a couple weeks on our YouTube channel and on our website. And yeah, so today we're just going to get started with part 2. I just thought I'd hop on and say hi, but I'm going to turn my webcam off now and just focus on the slides. All right, so just a little housekeeping information to get us started. You'll have a control panel if you're joining us via your desktop, and the control panel can be expanded or shrunk depending using that orange arrow. And then if you're joining us from the web, that's a little different. But if you do have the control panel, go ahead and expand it and you'll see all the sections. In the materials section, you'll find the handout. So if you didn't already download that yesterday, you can download it there today. There'll also be the ASHA paperwork that you'll want if you're an SLP receiving ASHA credit. And then also everyone is muted for the presentation. So if you have any questions or comments, expand your control panel and go to the chat section and type them there. Kim Gallant will be monitoring the chat window and posting some links. She'll also be posting some polls that you'll see pop up on your screen as we move through the presentation. ASHA housekeeping info for those of you submitting for ASHA CEUs. Please submit the participation form within 15 days and be sure and include the date on the form. There's instructions in the materials section. Also, the GoToMeeting training is time-stamped when you get on and off, and in order to receive credit, you do have to be on for the full hour. And then this is at the top here is the completion date. So it's highlighted. You don't need to worry about the course number, but just fill in the completion date. That way you'll receive proper credit. And this is your lengthy handout packet that is in the materials section. My colleague and I made this for an in-person 3-hour training that we did. So it has all the info that you need from yesterday's slides as well as today's slides. So it's got tons of info. Hopefully it's not too overwhelming, and there's a table of contents to help you keep organized. Just my info and disclosures here. This presentation, while it is pretty general about AAC, in goal writing, it will focus on Saltillo products when we give examples. And my financial disclosure is that I'm an employee owner of PRC Saltillo. And then my non-financial disclosure is just that I am an ASHA Sig 12 member. So we're going to actually launch our first poll just to figure out who is here with us today. Are you a parent? Are you a teacher? A speech therapist? If you don't see your name up there, go ahead and type it in the chat window. And then as you are filling that out, I'll give you a little bit of background about me in case you weren't on yesterday. I live in the Kansas City area. Currently it's kind of thunderstormy here, so you might hear some thunder in the background. And I worked as an SLP in this area for about 5 years, and then joined Saltillo in 2015. And I currently cover Western Missouri, Southwest Iowa, Kansas, Nebraska, and then I used to cover Arkansas and Oklahoma. So let's see. Okay, looks like the majority are speech therapists. We've got some teachers and some parents and some AT specialists here as well. So awesome. Well, that'll be good to know as we're moving through things. And thank you again so much for joining. Okay, so our agenda yesterday, just to recap, we went through understanding this AAC goal framework, this worksheet that's in your packet. And then we talked a little bit about a case study that we wrote some sample goals and objectives for. And then we walked through linguistic and operational competence and discussed what they were, discussed some baseline tools for measuring competence in those areas, and how to plug in some goals using that goal framework for both of those competencies. Today we're going to go through social and strategic competence, as well as how to make our goals SMART and monitoring progress. So just to recap, for those of you that might not have been able to join yesterday, this is that form that I was talking about. So at the top we have the communicative competencies, linguistic, how we understand and use language, operational, how we operate the mechanics of our device, social, the rules of interaction, and strategic, how we address barriers to communication. And then the main section there is the goal framework, or the goal attainment scale in the middle. And it is a rubric format with different levels. So level 1 is going to be our baseline. Level 3 is going to be the goal met. So the expected outcome. And then level 2 is somewhere in between the goal being met and the baseline. Level 4 is what we would be exceeding the goal. And then level 5 is going to be the skill we are targeting in a more generalized way, and just kind of the long-term hope for the goal. It's the best expected outcome. And lastly, at the bottom, we have the SMART framework, which we'll be reviewing today. So that's making our goals specific, measurable, agreed upon, realistic, and time-bound. And then just to recap our case study, it is a 6-year-old boy, Matthew, with autism, and his fine motor, vision, and hearing are all within normal limits, but he doesn't like loud noises. He got a NovaChat 8 about 2 months ago, and he's currently using WordPower 60 Basic. He also uses some signs and words on his device to communicate. And we also did an inventory yesterday of his interests, which include things like the iPad and riding the wagon and playing with various toys. So with that, we're going to dive right in where we left off yesterday. If you're following along in the handout, we're on page 19. So yeah, we're going to start with social competency. And again, the competencies can all overlap. So particularly social and linguistic competence, sometimes an objective that could be that could make somebody socially competent could also fall under linguistic competence as well. And we'll see more of that overlap when we discuss strategic competence as well. Okay, so what is social competence? It's the ability to understand and adhere to the social rules of interaction. Social competency skills are context dependent and need to be evaluated within the context of communication. My colleague, Amanda Hettenhausen, who's based in St. Louis, she and I had recently attended the Michelle Garcia Winner Social Thinking Workshop when we were creating this training. And we were thinking a lot about social thinking versus social skills, so that kind of informed some of this. And the social thinking curriculums do require an ability to understand complex lessons about social problem solving. But we've always found those to be a wonderful resource. So there's a link in your packet to find out more about that. And if you haven't checked that out, I recommend taking a look at that to see if it's appropriate for your clients. Like I said, the lessons center around in-time social problem solving instead of working on specific skills like turn taking and eye contact. But yeah, there are a lot of different definitions of social skills, but I kind of think of them as the abilities necessary to get along with others and to create and maintain satisfying relationships, which is a really important thing for everyone. Okay, so with that definition in mind, what tools are you guys using with your students and clients to determine appropriate social targets? Are you using, this will be our second poll, are you using pragmatic checklists, an inventory of communicative intentions, those functions of communication, language samples, formal testing, or something else. And if it's something else, feel free to type it in the chat window. And I'll take a look at the chat window. Okay, so it looks like pragmatic checklists are the most popular, but also some people doing inventory of communication intents, some language samples, but yeah, no formal testing. It's hard to assess pragmatic skills, social language with formal testing. So yeah, so for the purposes of this training, we're going to think about social competence similarly to how we looked at linguistic competence, and use some checklists and research for that. And we're also, we found this article on ASHA that breaks down social language into 3 major categories of using language for different functions of communication, so such as greetings, informing people, demanding things, promising, requesting, changing language based on listener situations, so according to the needs of the listener or situation. So that could look like talking differently to a baby than you would to an adult, kind of like code switching, giving background information to an unfamiliar listener, speaking differently in a classroom than you would on the playground, and then following the rules for conversations and storytelling, such as taking turns in conversation, introducing topics of conversation, and staying on topic. So yeah, here's those. There are tons of pragmatic checklists out there and charts available. So we have listed some in your handout. This isn't an exclusive list or necessarily even the best ones, but these are just some that we've used in the past and seen used and are sharing. Like I said, the social thinking one's a cool one for people who have the receptive language to be able to understand those more complex lessons. The Linguist Systems Guide, which Kim will post a link for. We mentioned this yesterday. They list out the functions of communication and Brown's stages in a really user-friendly format. They also have this pragmatics checklist in that booklet, and it's completely free. And then there's also this teacher's rating scale in your handout as well. And then we have a few more to share. Also, those functions of communication that we reviewed yesterday for linguistic competence can be used to take a look at social competence as well. So again, there's that overlap between linguistic and social. Also, we have this chart from the AAC Language Lab, and it's typically only a part of the paid portion. So there's a $20 yearly fee that you can pay for AAC Language Lab. There are some free resources as well, and they've just recently updated it. So check that out as well if you haven't recently. There's new supports now to support Saltillo's Word Power 42 basic and 60 basic vocab files. But anyways, this pragmatics chart breaks things down by the stages of language, and I really like the discourse rules portion particularly. So that's in your handout as well. And this skills streaming thing is just something that I used because it was on hand at the school that I worked with, and it worked well. But that, again, just kind of using what works and what you have on hand. There's not really a need to spend a lot of money, I don't think, for something like this. Okay, so which skills would we select for Matthew? We could choose many different pragmatic checklists and highlight where he is currently demonstrating skills and where he still has some progress to make. And then we can reflect on those and have discussions with family about what their goals are. In this case, in Matthew's case, his parents were indicating concern with his safety, and they wanted him to be able to state his personal information in case he ever needed to do that. So that is actually how we determined his objectives for social competence, was just the focus of his parents. So the objectives we're going to walk through today for social competence for Matthew are asking personal questions and answering personal questions. There's also a page within Matthew's vocabulary file that really supports this well, and that's through his social page and then his personal page. That's how you get there from the home page. So he has all these buttons that we can modify to have his name and where he lives, his school, and then he can ask reciprocal questions for each of those things as well. So those are going to be our targets. So we'll just fill this out like we did yesterday. So at the top, we're just going to write out Matthew's name and check social for social competence, because that's our overarching goal, to improve Matthew's social competence. Then we'll fill in the objective, one of the two objectives, which is for him to answer personal information questions. And then we'll determine his baseline as it relates to answering personal information questions. So currently, Matthew could verbally answer, "What is your name?" He will select the buttons on his personal page, but he's not accurate in his responses. So we want to increase that accuracy. So based on that baseline info, Matthew's learning style and his preferences and interests, we can decide what is a good goal for the coming IEP year. So this is level 3, where he would be expected to be at the end of the IEP year. That's the time frame that we're working within. And so Matthew will answer 5 personal information questions by selecting the pre-programmed messages from a field of 5 on his About Me page. So to decrease that visual field, we could do some quick hiding and make that goal more attainable for him. So that's going to be part of our plan to scaffold his learning for this objective. And then level 2 is going to be between the baseline and between the level 3, the expected outcome. And that's where we change 1 or 2 of the variables to make it, to show some potential subtle progress in case he does not reach the level 3. So for that one, we decided to say Matthew will answer 3 personal information questions by selecting the pre-programmed pages from a field of 5. Actually, from a field of 3, I think is what we meant to say. So we'll decrease that visual field. We could also add in that we would give him more verbal prompting or more visual prompting to increase his accuracy. And then level 4 is going to be 1 step above that level 3. And again, thinking about changing one of the variables. So Matthew will answer verbally by navigating and selecting from his messages on his personal page, personal information questions. So basically just all of the questions on there. And then level 5, this is going to be our seeing the skill generalized. So our best expected outcome, the long-term hope. And that is Matthew will answer practice and novel questions as it relates to personal information, or he'll indicate, "I don't know," when he doesn't know. And so there you have it. That's how it looks once it's all filled out. And then you would just repeat the same process for asking personal questions, his other objectives. So what skills would his communication partner need in order to support his ability to be successful with this goal? And like I said yesterday, this part I would have you shout these out if we were in person, but since we're not, I'm just going to share those with you. So the communication partner running this goal and helping implement this would need to first of all, know how to hide and show the buttons on the page to reduce the visual field and expand the visual field as he's learning. They would need to be able to customize his personal information, so they need to be able to take his NovaChat and put it into edit mode and tweak those icons to have his name and his personal info. They would need to know how to navigate to that information to be able to model it, so they need to have some familiarity with his vocab file and how things are organized. And they'd also need to know how to prompt him through that. So they need to know when to give him gesture prompts versus visual supports versus verbal prompts, and how to fade those prompts out over time. They would also need to create lots of opportunities for practice for him to answer these questions and ask these personal questions. So we used these cue cards yesterday as well at the end of each goal, just to show how you could write these things out step by step for other communication partners, so that other people besides just the person who wrote the goal can work on this skill. You could just write exactly how you would target it. So you could have that question that you would ask him at the top, and then note that you would give him some wait time of about 5 seconds, and then note what you would do if he doesn't respond with the target, and then also note what you would do if he does select the correct response, and that positive feedback that you would want to provide. And so basically you're just listing it out step by step very clearly. This was something that I worked at an ABA school, and we had to write out we called it our procedures for each goal and put it in a binder for that student. And that way their implementer, their teacher, or if like we were sick and there was a sub working for us that day, anyone could run these goals and work on them with them. So that's kind of the inspiration for this cue card. Okay, so moving on, strategic competence. This one's going to probably be the most involved in terms of explaining what it is. But it's the compensatory strategies used to overcome environmental barriers, restrictions of the AAC system, and personal limitations as they relate to operational competence, linguistic competence, and social constraints. It's also the ability to repair communication breakdowns. So these strategies, they may be temporarily placed, or they may be used with the individual for many years to come. It just kind of depends on what their purpose are. So it may be something that they're using while they build up their linguistic competence more, or their social competence more, and then they don't need that strategy anymore, or it just might be a strategy that they need for long term. So to help you kind of visualize what this looks like, you're learning strategies to overcome obstacles due to any of the following. So due to environmental barriers and restrictions of the AAC system. So that could be, somebody, if they're using a low-tech system, a restriction could be that it doesn't generate speech, and that other people in their environment don't understand how to use it. Environmental barriers could be all kinds of things, and we'll get into our list of that here in a minute. And then constraints, like I said, related to any of these 3 areas of linguistic competence, social, and operational competence. And we'll talk more about that as well. Okay, so this is a list that we came up with as a brainstorming tool for strategic competence that goes through each of these areas. So similar to operational competence, there aren't really formal assessments or checklists for what skills are required for strategic competence. So that's why we created this little brainstorming tool. It's not intended to be a comprehensive list, and it's not in any kind of hierarchy. These are just some ideas to consider for the person using the device. It's just kind of a place to start. So we'll go more specifically into each category. So starting off with the environmental barriers, on the left, you'll see what the barrier is, and on the right, you'll see some ideas for compensatory strategies to address that barrier. So if we're outside, some strategies could be using a low-tech board, finding shade, and sometimes the strategy is just eliminating the barrier or finding a way to eliminate the barrier, not necessarily implementing a strategy that needs to be a goal. If the barrier is being in water or being in a messy activity, again, a strategy could be having a low-tech board available or having the student request a low-tech option, having a waterproof sleeve for the device. Also, maybe having the device out for a messy activity like sidewalk chalk or something, but then learning how to clean the device after those activities. And then if the barrier is a loud, noisy environment, a objective could be raising our hand or going to a person, using the tap to expand feature, which is in the settings, and that's where it zooms out what's the message on the speech display bar. We also have a help signal button action that a person could use. And then another barrier could be phone conversations and having fluidity during phone conversations. So a strategy could be using an introductory statement, having a pre-programmed button that they can push right when that person answers the phone. Also using the saved message to create saved messages in advance for a specific conversation that they're about to have on the phone. And then these are some strategies to address linguistic constraints. So when we reviewed linguistic competencies, you may remember there were a lot of different skills. There's all kinds of things we can target as it relates to our use and understanding of language. And so we know we cannot work on all the skills at once, and we have to prioritize them. So this means that the person will have limitations linguistically, since we won't be able to address everything at once. So your strategy will rely heavily on what their linguistic limitations are and what you're currently targeting. And here's some examples of possible strategies for linguistic constraints. So using pre-programmed phrases to repair communication breakdowns. This screenshot you see here is from our aphasia file. There's some strategies pages in there. So there's some good ideas for that there, like speak slowly, please repeat the message, please be patient with me while I formulate my response. So those are some good ideas for addressing some linguistic constraints. Also using a different modality such as writing or gesturing when you don't have or can't find the word that you need to say. So using that total communication approach. Using voice recording to store longer messages. Our multi-chat files and word power files have a button action feature where you can press a button and record a message. So you could record a message at the end of the school day saying what the student did that day, and then they could go home and play that message for their family and share it. So that could be a strategy while they're working on being able to combine more words and share stories more independently. And then these are some examples of strategies to address social constraints. So using an introductory statement with a communication partner that explains what the device is and what its purpose is. Gaining attention using pre-stored messages like, excuse me, come here, I need you for a minute, look at this. And then again, that tap to expand feature that we just mentioned is in the settings. You could use that during situations where you need to be really quiet or situations where it's too loud and noisy for the speaker to be heard. So this, we took an inventory of the skills that Matthew has, and went through, highlighted them like we did for some of the other competencies to determine what restrictions and constraints he is currently facing. And then we prioritized these into 2 objectives after taking the inventory of his barriers and constraints. And we decided to work on using an introductory statement to explain his device, and also using a low-tech board for outside and water-based activities. Okay, so we're going to plug this in. Again, at the top, we'll just write Matthew's name and check strategic competence, since our overarching goal is to improve his strategic competence. Then we'll fill in his first objective, which is using an introductory statement to explain his AAC system. And so this is what that button looks like, and it's on his social page. And it might be something that you want to, as the communication partner, tweak. This is what comes default on the device, but we might change that to say something like, this is Matthew's talker, he uses it to speak for him. Something that's age appropriate and reflective of his personality. Then we'll plug in the baseline info, which is Matthew will use pre-programmed messages from his social page if asked, what is this device? What is that device? He will select a button randomly, and he will also get his device when directed. So those are kind of the related things we need to know about how he might perform with this skill. And based on that information and based on his learning style, we can fill in his goal for the year, his expected level, which is when asked, what is this device, and pointing to the device, Matthew will navigate to use the introductory statement to explain what his device is to 5 different people. So for level 2, we're going to think about what variable we want to change from his goal to make it more achievable so that we can measure subtle progress if he doesn't quite meet his goal. And so that's going to be when asked, what is that device, Matthew will navigate to his introductory statement and explain it to 2 different people with 1 gesture prompt. So instead of 5 people, it's just 2 familiar communication partners, and he's also able to receive a gesture prompt. So then level 4 is going to be 1 step above level 3. And again, we'll want to change a variable to show what that might look like if he exceeds his goal. So we said Matthew will use the introductory statement to explain the device to a variety of people in a variety of environments. So not just 5 people, but a larger variety of people. And then lastly, our level 5, our best expected outcome, is going to be what we think of that skill as in a more generalized way, what we think of it as. And that is Matthew will use an introductory statement to explain his device when asked to self-advocate, such as if a peer touches his device. And so that's how it looks all filled out. And again, you would just repeat that for his other strategy of using his low-tech board.
Betsy,
Yes.
we have a question from Mary Jean. She would like for you to explain the tap to expand feature again.
Oh, yes. So in the settings, if you go, I believe it's under input. Let me pull it up right here. And so if you go to menu, settings, input, there's the, under speech display bar, there's the tap to expand option, and you just check that box. And then you'll notice when you go back to the vocab file, if you have words in the speech display bar and you touch it, it will expand to take up the whole, so it'll zoom out to take up the whole screen. So I can just show you real quick because I have my device right here. Let me turn my webcam on. Okay, oh, can you guys see me? Is it working today?
Yes.
I actually don't. Oh, it is? Okay, let's see. I don't see it. Oh, there we go. Okay, so when I select some words, oops,
Ocean.
and then touch the speech display bar, it takes up the whole screen. So if I was in a really loud environment or a really quiet environment like a library, this could be a great strategy, since it's harder to have a whisper or something like that. Okay, thanks. Yeah, and no, if you have any other questions, please post those in the chat window. Some of them we might wait to answer till the end, and some of them we can answer as we move along. Okay, so for this, using the introductory statement button, what skills would the communication partner need in order to support his ability to be successful with this objective? They would need to create opportunities, so they would need to set the activity up with 5 different people. That might mean some communication partner training and going, we used to have some goals like this where we would have the student go up to like the secretary and ask a question or give her a piece of information, and we would kind of have to fill her in obviously beforehand and let her know what the goal was that we were working on and kind of what we were hoping, how we were hoping she would respond. So kind of picking out those different communication partners and setting that up. They also would need to be able to customize the statement to be reflective of Matthew's age and personality. And they would need to know how to navigate to the correct information and model it and then prompt as needed. Okay, and then here's our other cue card for our strategic objective. And again, just how to introduce the question, the wait time. So this could be something that you give to like the secretary that I just mentioned, to kind of show her like it'd be great if you could give him some wait time while he finds what he needs to say on his device, and kind of, or even model it for her and do the interaction right in front of her. So as we mentioned, the second objective is related to using a low-tech board during water activities. So Kim's going to share the links to be able to download our communication boards and books from the Saltillo website. It's under the chat corner section, and it's a great free resource. You can print them. This board, there's a way to print it to be more poster size, so you can have that for the room, for the classroom setting. And yeah, so those are great. There's also the books that go along with some various word power files, like word power 42 basic and 60 basic. So check those out if that's something one of your clients or students needs. Also, Kim's going to post the link for Chat Editor. Chat Editor you can print pages from, so you can print customized pages. So for example, you could have a printout of the art page and have that laminated in the art section, so that if you're doing a really messy activity and you don't want the device out, you have their customized art page printed and laminated for them to access. Also with Chat Editor, you can copy and paste icons and customize low-tech options even more, and as well as create other types of materials like classroom labels, which can also be used for strategies. Okay, so we're going to do a little review, and I'm going to pull up the chat window here. This is just a game we're going to play called Name That Competency. So I'm going to give you an objective, and I want you to type in the chat window which competency you think that it is. So, using a pre-programmed sentence to repair a communication breakdown. What strategy? Okay, yes. Chris wrote, okay, yes, we're seeing strategic. A lot of people are typing in. Good job. kind of an easier one since we just covered it, but yes, good work. Okay, next, independently navigates through a vocabulary file. Yes, okay, good. Operational, so this refers to the ability to use the mechanics of the device. Awesome. Increase use of core vocabulary by 20 words. Yes. Good. You guys got it. Awesome. It says linguistic. And then last one, uses 6 or more communicative functions. Okay, good. Okay, so most people are saying social. And actually, this one is kind of a trick question because, yes, it could be social. It could also be linguistic. So remember that Venn diagram of the overlap of the competencies. So this could also be, it could be kind of fall under either or. Just maybe if you're focusing on more social communicative functions, then it would fall under that competency. But if it was things related to exchanging information and communicating wants and needs, it might be more of a linguistic function. So good job. Thank you for playing along. Okay, so now that we've gotten through the objectives or the competencies, we're going to talk about fine-tuning our goals and objectives. So to do that, we've got the SMART framework at the bottom of that worksheet that we're going to where we're going to do a SMART check to make sure our goals are specific, measurable, agreed upon, realistic or relevant, as well as time-bound. And this is purposely positioned at the bottom of the form because we want the initial focus to really be on getting the content of the goals, and then SMART helps us fine-tune our writing and ensure we have included all the necessary components to be considered for good quality goals and objectives. Okay, so these two handouts you have in your packet, and it just goes through more in depth what it means to be specific, measurable, agreed upon, realistic, and time-bound. So we're going to kind of review this and talk about how we can tweak our goals to make sure that they are very clear. So to make the goal specific, we want to use wording that's clear and understood by everyone on the team. So when possible, we want to avoid jargon that is going to be too high level and too specific to one discipline for other people in different disciplines to understand, or parents, or even the person using AAC to understand. We also want to write it so that anyone else could implement it and monitor it if possible. I used to also think about, what if I left this job and went to a new job? Would the person that took over be able to receive my goals and understand what I was intending to target, or would that be really vague and confusing for them? We want to use doing words to describe a behavior that's seen or heard. So this page on the right is something that we used where I used to work, because we were in, like I said, a behavior setting. So we were trying to make our goals very clear and avoid wording that was vague. So it lists some slippery words in the right column there, and then it also lists some words that are what they call doing words, and I would refer to this when I was writing goals often. I know in the past I had written goals like so-and-so will participate in a 20-minute social skills group or something to that effect, and then I saw that participate word in the slippery column, and I thought about how vague that could be and how I really needed to be more specific about what skills were being targeted and what change I wanted to see within that student. We also want to give context to the skill when and where we can, so noting the time of day, noting whether it's in a structured activity or if it's in a really specific type of play activity, noting what that is if possible. Sometimes we have to be a little bit vague because we don't want to pigeonhole ourselves to a specific activity that might lose the student's interest after a while, or might not be available after a while. But where we can, we want to be as specific as we can. Also describing types of supports and giving examples. So people may tend to say things like minimal support, moderate support, but if we can specifically say, we'll provide one verbal cue, one visual cue, that is even more precise and clear. Okay, so we also want our goals to be measurable. So we want to assign a value that makes sense for the skill we're targeting. That could be increasing the duration, the spontaneity, the frequency, the speed, the accuracy, or it could be decreasing the level of prompt or the level of latency. So we want to think beyond just that 80% across 3 out of 4 data days kind of wording, and think about really what is the variable that we want to see changing over time. We want to ensure the value clearly shows progress over time, consider the environment and the communication partners, and make sure the intention of the goal is in sync with the criteria of the goal. We also want our goals to be agreed upon as much as possible, so just having the whole team agree that that's a priority. Where I used to work, we would have a goal review meeting before the IEP, just to make sure that our special ed goals didn't overlap with our speech and language goals, and the parents would also report what skills they were really hoping to work on in the coming year, and we would factor that into what we were targeting at school. And we also want to ensure the goal reflects the person's needs, interests, and abilities, and that we select skills that improve the quality of life and functional communication for that person. We want our goals to be realistic, so we want to target skills that are emerging and that have some potential for growth. And we want to consider time restraints, consider the skills of the communication partner, and consider possible barriers within the environment to make sure we're setting ourselves up for success with our goals. And then lastly, we want to make sure that the goal is time bound. So that's why there's a date on the form where you date the day you're writing the goal, and then you date the date of the next IEP, or the end of the month of therapy, or the end of the 10 approved insurance visits, so you know the time frame that you're working within. And then consider that length of time relative to the target. So is it realistic to achieve that skill in that amount of time? Okay, so let's tweak this objective to be a little bit more, we're going to use this SMART framework to tweak it and make it more specific, measurable, agreed upon, realistic, and time bound. So Matthew will use 6 target prepositions. This was one of our linguistic competency objectives from yesterday. Matthew will use 6 target prepositions to direct action during structured play with minimal support. So let's think through, is this SMART? Is this specific? We may want to change minimum support because one person's understanding of minimal prompting or minimal support may vary from another person. So we really want to define that more clearly. Is it measurable? 6 prepositions, that is measurable, I think. He might be using 5 at the end of when we go to measure progress, or 3, but we want him to be using all 6. Is it agreeable, or is it agreed upon? Yes, we made that decision with the team initially. Is it realistic? We may want to add the activities that are motivating for him to make it more realistic and more clear. And is it time bound? So again, if you were using that rubric and it was dated, then yes, it would be time bound. But if we were taking this wording and copying and pasting it somewhere else, we might want to put the date on there. So it could look something like this. By May 2018, Matthew will use 6 target prepositions to direct action during motivating structured play activities given aided language input and indirect visual cues. So we're specifically outlining what that prompting would look like and trying to better define structured play. So we're not entirely pigeonholing ourselves into specific toys. That way we have some flexibility in case we need it. So we made it more specific, more realistic. We made it time bound by putting that date on there, and it already was measurable. There's this prompt hierarchy in your handout as well. I really like this one. It's by Kate Ahern. If you haven't checked her out, she's got a really good blog and she's on social media sharing some good content. The thing I like about it is that it breaks down prompting into a least intrusive to most intrusive format, which there's lots of visuals out there that do that, but hers has kind of this umbrella over it that says always using aided language stimulation. So you don't really want to think of modeling as a prompt at all. It's just kind of something that's always occurring in the background, and sometimes it's more direct and emphasizing specific concepts, and sometimes it's just more general. But with that always happening, you still want to be thinking about the prompting. So the least intrusive thing you could do would just be to create lots of motivation and create something that's really fun and engaging. And then it goes through wait time, with expectant pause, indirect visual cues, direct visual cues, direct verbal cues, so that you, or maybe if you're trying to explain prompting hierarchy, you can explain how one prompt is more intrusive than another. So that might be a helpful handout for you as you're working with your teams. Okay, so this is also in your handout, and this is just an opportunity to practice tweaking some objectives to be more SMART, to do the SMART checklist, or you could also do the SMART checklist with objectives that you currently have. But in the interest of time, we're not going to go through any more of them right now. Instead, we're going to talk about monitoring progress. And so this picks up on page 34 of the handout. So now that you know where you're starting and where you want to go, let's get going and monitor our progress. So a goal is only as good as your ability to measure it. You don't have to collect trial data at every session, but you want to make sure you are collecting the right data. So we have some thoughts to help frame that data collection and progress monitoring. In between data collection, there always needs to be lots of learning opportunities and teachable moments so that the AAC user can focus on the skill in an environment where their interests are being considered and their abilities are considered. We also want to keep it in line with how we've worked through things today. So when we decide we want to collect data, we want to look at what we already have, so those baseline tools. And there's lots of ways to track data, so we're going to talk through some of those. First of all, you could use the goal framework and just put the dates directly on there once you see something met as a way to mark progress. There's also these charts that were in the goal attainment scale article that we referred to when we were creating this training. And so basically it's just really simple. You have your different levels, level 1 is baseline, level 3 is goal met, level 5 is best outcome. So you could put all of your objectives on this chart, and then you could see which ones exceeded the goal, which ones made it to level 2, which ones made it to level 3. So that's a nice way to visualize the progress over multiple goals at once. There's also tons of data collection forums. If you use Pinterest or if you search Practical AAC, they have some good blog posts about that as well. So you can kind of check those resources out to see what might work for you and what might work for that goal that you're using. And again, we want to think about our baseline tools. So we offered some brainstorming tools, but also just the same things we used to get our baseline information, the quad profile, AAC Language Lab. Like I said, they have some great resources, and they have evaluation tools that are free. If we have time at the end, I have that pulled up and I'll show you some of those. Also, there's the AAC Communication Profile, which I think it costs about $70, but it's organized by communicative competency. So that really goes along well with the format of our training if you're interested in that. Let's see, I feel like there was something else I was going to show. Yes, so I guess that's all I had for that. And so now we'll launch our third poll. What is one tool you use to help monitor progress? Another tool that we've mentioned a little bit throughout the training is the realized language accounts. So if you are collecting data by turning on data logging and you have a realized language account, you can pull up reports that are really helpful to note different aspects that you might be looking for related to your goals. Okay, looks like checklists and language samples are the two most popular. Okay, great. So yeah, the realized language is in your handout. There's also a link in the chat box. I definitely encourage you to check that out as a way to monitor progress. And we are nearing the end of the hour. So I'm going to kind of skip through this next part quickly. Oops. Basically, these are the main things that we want to consider when we're collecting data: the measurement of change, the format, who's collecting it, and the frequency, as well as the obstacles. So here are some of those considerations for this preposition target. The measurement of change is the number of prepositions and the level of support. We want to think about who's collecting the data, because like we noted earlier in the training, that could impact the success. We want to think about the obstacles, like motivation or lack of opportunities could be the potential obstacles with this objective. We also want to think about the frequency and the format. So do we need an occasional video? Are we going to use customized data sheets? So here's all those considerations just on our own, handwritten on our own, and then you could use that to make something more specific, and this is what's in your handout. So just kind of showing how you could start with the goal and consider all these factors to create your own way of collecting data that works for that specific goal. So you have that, and since we're so close to the end, I'm not going to do the last poll, but hopefully you gathered a lot of ideas and resources. And yeah, we're at the top of the hour. If you have questions, I'm going to stay on and answer those. But feel free to connect with us on social media. And thanks for staying on for the whole hour. You'll be receiving certificates and feedback within 1 hour. Please do fill out the feedback surveys. This is, like I said yesterday, the first time we're presenting this one online, so we would love to have some feedback.